Welcome to the Healthy Christian Leader. I'm Dwight Habermel. Come join me in the living room for some honest conversations. I'll be talking to guests about their journey with Christ through the joys, the challenges, and the messiness of leadership. There's always something to learn from someone's story, so let's get started.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Healthy Christian Leader. I'm Rachel Habermel and I work here with Ministries, and I'm very pleased to be joined again by Dr. Richard MacGillivray. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the topic of leadership. So Dr. MacGillivray, welcome here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, first could you tell us a little bit about yourself for people who might not have had a chance to view the prior episodes?
Okay. Well, I'm a retired psychologist. I had a career spanning about 40 years. I've started out working in the school system, but after I took my doctorate, I moved into clinical psychology and also into community psychology and organizational consulting as part of that direction in my training.
Amazing. So you've seen a lot of different leaders.
Yes.
In a lot of different contexts.
That's right. Both in places that I was called in as a consultant, but I've also worked in a lot of settings as well. Mostly in the public sector, although I did work as a consultant on a kind of permanent retainer basis with one consulting firm in the private sector. But of course then I ran my own business for the rest of my career. So
yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a first question on the topic of leadership. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the qualities that a strong leader has? What does a good leader look like?
That's a really good question and it's not one that has a really simple answer. A lot of it depends on the life cycle of the organization, like where they are in the organization, the size of it, and so forth. There's a tendency in the social psychology literature. They talk about the traditional leaders, what they refer to as agentic leaders. An agentic leader is a leader who makes things happen. When we see movies about great American generals or political leaders or hero movies, we tend to see people who are assertive, achievement oriented. They're doers. They get things done. And we tend to think of that, well, okay, that's what a leader looks like. And sometimes it is. But we also have what they refer to as communal leaders. These are leaders who emphasize more the development of the skills and abilities of people under them, being able to work together with people. And I think even as I describe this, you can see that not one or the other would be ideal at all times. Much of the time when an organization is new, it's because somebody has an idea. Whether it's a company they're starting, whether it's a new pastor in an established church, or someone who's starting a new one, or a new principal in a school. And sometimes what you'll see when that happens is people, they outline a vision, they outline a goal, which is important, but it diffuses as we get into the way that the organization operates on an ongoing basis in terms of how you work with and utilize the people working with you. The other comment I'd make just about the lifestyle of an organization is most organizations, when they start flat. In other words, most people know most jobs. There's usually one person who's decided, let's start this, or maybe there's a couple of partners or something like that. But they tend to be there's not much hierarchy. And so the number of people involved are typically small. And so what happens is, it's a little like Bill Gates operating his computer sales business out of the trunk of his car.
Right.
Like everybody, me and the other guys, we could all fix this, and there's not much going on. But after a while, as the organization grows, or if you're in the situation of a pastor or a principal coming into an established organization, it becomes more hierarchical, simply because leaders can't realistically do all of the jobs.
Sure.
Or
Yeah.
even know how to do all of the jobs. I mean, a good orchestra leader doesn't know how to play every instrument.
Right.
Or if he or she does, they may not know how to play them as well as the piano player over there or the bassoon player over here. So those are just a couple of just general things to keep in mind. So we need to see we have to know the life cycle of the organization, where it's at, and what role the leader is playing. So because sometimes the leader is going to be, you do this, you do that.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's what has to be done. I mean, if you're in a foxhole in the middle of a battle, you don't take a vote on what we're going to do next.
Sure.
Somebody says, go over there. On the other hand, if you're having a high rate of attrition in the workplace, if you've got a lot of people leaving, you can't just be telling people what to do. You need to understand what's happening, and you need to be able to utilize the people that you have, and so it's a different set of skills.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
No, I think that's a great start to kind of give a bit of vision to it. And as we're thinking about leadership, like I think one mark of a good leader is someone who doesn't just do great things on their own, but is able to bring people alongside them to accomplish great things.
That's right.
Can you speak a little bit to what practices a leader can, utilize to create vision and unified efforts?
Right. Well, one of the things, I'm going to assume that for most of the listeners, they're not talking about a startup.
Yeah.
They're talking about an established organization, which there is at least some degree of hierarchy. And so one of the most important skills for the leader to have is to keep in mind what the goal of the organization is, what its purpose is. That is an extremely easy thing to lose sight of. And the second thing is to recognize that the hierarchy exists for a practical purpose. So one of the things we have to do is we have to seek the goal that the organization exists for, but seek it by using the skills out there, which is to recognize that the people who report to you, who may be heading a committee, or maybe running the education function of the church or the school, where people are carrying out a function, and each of those leaders must resemble you in a sense, if you're the leader, in the sense that they need to establish their vision under that, their vision congruent with yours. So it is important to recognize that we get what we get done through these other people. One of the true pitfalls of leadership is for leaders who attempt to kind of put their oar in other people's area, if I can put it that way. I worked with a leader a number of years ago, and he was certainly a well-intentioned person, and he had a great sense of vision of where this was in a department in a hospital. He had a great sense of where it should go, and he certainly established a hierarchy to make it work that way. But you couldn't walk down the hall without him saying, "Do you have a minute?" And a minute, of course, was never a minute.
Right. All the ad hoc meetings.
That's right. And what happened for even the people, his sort of second in commands, if I can put it that way, he would be talking to the people who reported to the people that he was, the people at the next level below him. And the result was chaos. Because you had the next lower level of management did not know all of the issues that were happening, and were also not able to act on initiative or to respond to things or sort things out themselves. And that's sometimes we learn to do something correctly by observing somebody who doesn't do it correctly.
That's very true.
That's why I use that example. I think if you give someone a job, you let them do it. one of the things is when you're doing that is you delegate the work, but so you're not doing the work directly, but you very much need the next level of management, if I can put it that way, to be your conduit on what's happening. So the leader still has to know everything that's going on.
Right, yeah.
But has to take a step back and use the ears of the people who report to them. If you do that, occasionally you'll get people in the next level up. And I hate using terms like this because they're awkward to use. But you can still, with that second level, you need to know enough so that you can sense when that's not working too.
Right, yeah.
Because at the same time as you're trying to make sure that level 3 people are doing what they're doing through level 2 people.
There can be some disconnect at
That's
some
right.
point, yeah.
And you're trying to you're working through level 2, but you're hearing everything too. So to go back, if I can just kind of summarize it, what are the good attributes for a leader? You have to articulate the vision. You have to inspire the next level down. They need to carry the vision out, and you need to step back. But you need to keep listening all the time.
That's great. That's a good summary right there. I mean, we could practically use that. No, that's fantastic. And I think one really interesting thing you touched on there is the idea of like a leader has to be able to trust their team.
That's right.
But not to an extent that's maybe negligent. You know, you don't want to say, oh, I'm sure they've got it, I just won't check in with it at all. And I think often there's a lot of these sort of traits that leaders have to find a balance in. They have to be trusting, but not to a negligent extent. And, you know, they have to, you know, maybe be empathetic towards people, but not to an extent that's too lenient. You know, they should be authentic, but maybe not to an extent that's inappropriately personal in a workplace. Right. How, as a leader, do you navigate those constant, trying to find the balance between those traits?
Okay. I think the first thing is when we talk about trust, I think it is important to trust. But remember, you know, trust is something we do. And we don't do it as a simple act of faith. In other words, we hire people, we assign them to the roles, or else we accept them because they're in the role when we show up. But we allow them to demonstrate the competence or abilities that we're looking for. So you are constantly evaluating when you're a leader. So because what you want is to have your trust built. Trust is, again, it's something that you're doing, and it's something, all behavior has a consequence. You're allowing people the ability to carry out the roles that you're assigning, but you're giving them the chance to prove that trust is justified.
Right, yeah.
So you have to keep your ears and your eyes open in order so that they can show that they know what they're up to. Because the other thing that you're there to do is not simply to evaluate, but it's also to nurture. You shouldn't assume that the person who reports to you, the leader who reports to you, has to know how to solve every problem. They just have to have the right orientation towards getting it done. And they need to lean on you. So partly a leader's a teacher too. So you're there for a reason. It's been said that, this is a quote from, I think, President Eisenhower, that you, as a leader, you shouldn't hear any problem that can be solved by somebody lower in the organization than you. And that's a good way to have it. I mean, you allow your people to solve their problems. But if they can't, then they need to be able to come to you.
Definitely, yeah.
And use you as a resource so you can help them solve it, not so that you can solve it. Because I think that's one of the problems. The gentleman I was referring to, I think he thought he had to solve the problems, which made leaders redundant. It can be very frustrating to be a second-level leader if you don't get the opportunity to carry out the solution, because those solutions in turn gain the trust of people who report to you and gain you credibility. I think what happens in organizations a lot of the times is that the second level of leadership, or the third level, depending on where you are in it, don't feel they have credibility with the people who report to them. And in larger organizations that I've intervened with, that was a very common problem.
Interesting.
Yeah. Especially when you get into big public sector settings and so forth, when you get a new person who's in charge, who reports to somebody above, and you're reporting to that person, and people think, well, you know, this person isn't running the show. And so people do what they call an end run, or they red circle people. They just act like they're not there, and they just go to the person over top of them. So if you're a leader, and you've got a second level leader under you, but you're hearing a lot from the level underneath that, that's a problem. And one of the things you should be attuned to is directing those people back to the second level leader. So if you've got a second level leader named Joe, and you've got somebody named Mary who comes to you, you say, have you talked, what does Joe think about this? You know, you run that by Joe and see what you can work out. And you know, I'll talk to Joe about that later this week.
Right, so one of your roles then as a leader is to reinforce a healthy structure.
That's right.
And if you see someone being red circled, maybe trying to
That's right.
adjust that. Yeah.
That's right.
That's really interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said before, people get into a lot of difficulties that way because it's excruciatingly uncomfortable for that that second level leader. And also that just because that leader is there for a reason to sort things out, the higher level leader, you in this discussion, ends up being way too busy. And it's frustrating for you because you're dealing with stuff you shouldn't have to deal with, which is probably distracting you away from what your real role is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's huge. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And I think in this idea of kind of multiple tiers of leadership or multiple leaders in one room, in the work that I get to do, I get to work with a lot of leaders, and that's one of my favorite things about what I get to do, because there's lots of people to learn from. And I'm often in rooms with multiple leaders, you know, people who are very used to being in leadership positions. And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of these good leaders know when to step up as leaders, but also when to step back.
Right.
Can you speak a little bit to that? How can we discern when we have a responsibility to step up as a leader, but also to step back, and when we're not the leader in the room?
I think a big part of that is being able to evaluate consequences. Part of that comes with experience.
Right, yeah.
Because I had a wonderful mentor early in my career, Dr. Joelle Kaplan. And I remember in my days of being in hospital administration, when I was working in that role myself, talking to her about a particular issue that we were focused on with one of the units. And she made a very memorable comment. She said, if it were me, I'd have let the staff try that out and fail.
Interesting.
She said, the failure's not going to cost you much.
Right.
But she didn't put it exactly that way, but essentially it would be good for them to try it. And you know, and if it goes really south, we can fix this.
Right.
But it would have been a good growth experience for people to take on that initiative themselves. Because our goals, no matter what level of leadership that we're at, one of the ways we should evaluate ourselves is by how much the people who report to us grow.
That's really good. Yeah.
So
well, and that's that idea of being a teacher again, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you develop people, it's like the orchestra leader. If under your tutelage that bassoon player can play a hot bassoon that they couldn't play when they started, even though you can't play bassoon, you've done your job well. So that's what we're trying to do. The other thing that we have to watch for, and I think this is particularly true in smaller organizations and in organizations where volunteer membership is a big part. And this really affects, I think, churches and community groups and so forth, is that you oftentimes you don't keep the talent. You don't hear from people. They don't complain. They leave. And so one of the things we need to do is make sure that this is an environment that people feel able to contribute, because it's oftentimes an intrinsic reason that they're joining the organization. You know, if they're in your to use a church example, if they're in your music ministry, they have a love for music,
Right.
and that combines with their faith. And so they're wanting to contribute something they have to offer. And if they get that, you've got a viable and happy contributor to the
Yeah.
overall well-being of that music ministry. If they leave, and if they haven't said anything, and they leave, that's not a good sign.
Right, yeah.
I remember this is the honest, true story. I was asked at one time by the leader of music ministry at a church I was attending to play with a particular choir that I didn't know, who were doing a big presentation. And so they had a pianist. The leader was a pianist, but they wanted a guitar, and I play guitar. So I said, sure, I'd come along. By halfway through the first rehearsal, I just put my guitar in my guitar case and left. I just walked out the door. And because that wasn't going so well.
Right.
I didn't say anything. I didn't decide I was going to be rude to anybody. I just left. And the leader called me back, and she and I had actually a good laugh. She was a wonderful person. We had a good laugh about what the dynamics in that particular choir were like, and we talked about how it could work, and she enticed me back, so she was a good leader. And I ended up playing with them in that presentation. But what I did there is something I've seen in a lot of people in volunteer organizations. They just get turned off and they leave. So that's one of the responsibilities, and it goes back to something which is also true in a business sense. Rule 1, keep the talent.
It's a good rule.
The hardest thing you can do is get good people to do the job. And you can't invent talent. You can't make talent. So if you find talent, do what you can to keep the talent. Now, I mean, I know there are some difficulties with that sometimes too, because some talented people can be not easy to work with.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that follows along with the overall goals of the organization and those other things. Sometimes what we teach people is not what to do, but what not to do.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the point on kind of being able to communicate, you don't want people just leaving.
Right. Yes.
You ideally want to be hearing from your team what could go better. How do you keep that open communication with your team without it becoming just a free-for-all, complaining or opinions or everything? Like, how do you keep that structure and order that you might need in an organization while still making sure you're getting feedback from the team, so that if there's issues or if there's things that are making people uncomfortable, you're hearing about them and have an opportunity to fix them before they're leaving?
Right. That is a good question, because you do need to get that kind of input from people. You need to hear how people are, and there are pitfalls to avoid. I can give an example of a very effective leader. Back from my school psychology days, I worked for a gentleman named Don Middleton, who's passed away now, I'm sorry to say. But we had a difficulty in our particular branch, and his way of dealing with it was he came to the branch and spoke to each of us individually and talked about what was going on and got buy-in from us as to what the solution would be like. The mistake he didn't make was having a big meeting. One of the things we should watch for is the useful use of meetings and the times you shouldn't use them.
Okay, yeah.
There's an economist named Thomas Sowell that I like listening to, because he's a I don't know what the right term would be, bit of a firebrand.
Okay.
Very interesting guy. Started out very interested, I gather, in communism. Decided, no, that didn't work for people. And he's kind of on the other side of it, kind of enlightened capitalism, in the sense that he argues that this is the most good for the most people. But he has a saying that I really like, which is, people who enjoy meetings should never be in charge of anything.
Okay. That's a good saying.
And there's another one, John Kenneth Galbraith, another famous economist, who said, meetings are a wonderful way to make sure you don't get anything done. It can happen that way. And I've seen this in meeting contexts, especially if there's if you sense as a leader problematical issues. Meetings can be good ways to elicit information, but if you think that something is contentious or difficult or might put people on the spot, because large groups of people can be intimidating to minority members of the group, and by minorities I don't mean like religious or racial or whatever. I mean whoever has less representation in that group.
Right.
So it could be the people who work the front desk. They might be the smallest group in there, or the people involved in the youth ministry, or the primary teachers. So it can be a difficult environment. The other thing is, and I think we touched on this in our last interview, groups tend to make more extreme decisions than individuals do. So if there's a contentious issue, a meeting might be the last thing you want.
Right, you get that sort of groupthink going, and
that's right.
Yeah, everyone piles onto the same idea.
That's right. Now, if you're the immediate person that all of these people are reporting to, it's probably a good idea to talk to the main players individually to start. Occasionally, it can be useful to have maybe two people who seem to be in the sort of a like mind, but that can be tricky. That can be tricky, especially if you're meeting with them by yourself, because you're now outnumbered.
Right, that's a very good point. Well, this has been incredibly helpful, discussion and feedback on some of the kind of key pieces of leadership. And in the next discussion, we're going to talk about team dynamics a little bit, kind of following this conversation. So we're looking forward to tapping into that. And Dr. Richard MacGillivray, thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Well, today's conversation was fantastic, but we're not finished yet. We'll be back in the next video with the same guest with more discussion about leader health. You know the drill. Subscribe and hit that bell. Would you join us for the next episode? You can find new episodes every week in video form on the Aaron Ministry YouTube page and in audio form as the Healthy Christian Leader Show wherever you get your podcasts. Aaron Ministries is an interdenominational network of friends in ministry with a mission to foster healthy Christian leaders. Check out our website, aaronministries.com, for more resources and information on how to donate or to start a healthy Christian leader gathering in your area. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.